Welcome to everyone joining us for this month's ECR Wednesday webinar hosted by eLife, the series that aims to give early career researchers a platform to discuss issues important to you and your research career. My name's Emma, I work for the eLife Features team, and today we're discussing a topic that's particularly close to my heart: how to engage different audiences with your research. The webinar will begin with the panelists sharing their stories. Then, in the second half of the webinar, we'll be putting your questions to them. To ask a question, you can type in the question box on the GoToWebinar Functions panel, or you can tweet us, we are eLife_careers, using the ECR Wednesday hashtag. I'll also be doing a bit of live tweeting during the webinar under the ECR Wednesday hashtag, including sharing the links to any resources mentioned by our panelists. Please also join us on Twitter immediately after the webinar, where we'll be continuing discussion under, you guessed it, the ECR Wednesday hashtag. Finally, I'd just like to let you know that we are recording the webinar and will make it available on YouTube in the near future. Now I'll pass over to Stuart to introduce himself and the panelists.
Right, so thank you, Emma, for that introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep. Hello and welcome to the eLife ECR Wednesday webinar for April 2017. My name is Stuart King, and I'm also an associate features editor here at eLife. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by three panelists. We can see two of them via the webcam, and one's just phoned in. They're all looking forward, like me, they're all looking forward to a great discussion today about the different ways that scientists can engage new audiences and communicate to them about your research and the benefits that you can gain doing that. So before I start, I just want to quickly just introduce eLife to anyone who's unfamiliar. So eLife is a non-profit organization that's inspired by these three big funders of research, and we're all led by active scientists. We're perhaps best known for our open access journal, also called eLife, which aims to accelerate discovery by removing many of the barriers that more traditional journals impose that limit the way that scientists can communicate their best research. Our initiatives are led and advised by our panel of ECR early career researchers. So this community of researchers have been behind many of our initiatives, and including this webinar series. And the aim of today's webinar, obviously get to the point, is to talk about the communication of research. So like Sir Mark Walpole, I agree that science isn't finished until it's communicated. I think that's going to be a key message from today's webinar. And like this quote here, I also agree that part of that communication needs to be the communication of the research to a wider audience, so beyond the scientists in the same field, to scientists in other fields, the general public at large. So there are a number of different ways that we can communicate research. I think personally, the one I'm most familiar with, and perhaps most of our audience will be most familiar with, is the publication of scientific papers. So these are milestones in a scientist's career, and they're events that scientists will celebrate. But I think it goes without saying that these are, again, generally aimed at other scientists in the field. So if we want to come up with ways to reach out to new audiences, we need to use other methods of communication as well. So one of the ways you can use your paper to communicate more widely is to publish open access. So if you publish in an open access journal, or you post a copy of the paper to a freely available repository, people can find your work and build on it. But they can only obviously build on it and use it if they can understand it. So the style and language used in scientific papers being geared towards other experts in the field poses a problem there. One way to get around that problem would be to use to summarize the research in common language, in plain language. So to avoid the jargon that allows scientists to communicate clearly with each other, but provides a barrier to anyone else understanding the work. So we do this at eLife. We do this. I personally do this. I work with scientists publishing in the journal to prepare plain language summaries, which we call eLife digests, that go within their research papers when published, and they explain and summarize the main findings of the paper in language that's accessible to those beyond the field of research. We're not the only organisation that does this. A number of organisations do this, ranging from other journals to medical charities. And we recently researched this and sort of shared our own experiences and the experiences of others in this collection of articles on the plain language summaries of research. If you want to find out more about that, the link's available on the screen, so you can access that at elifesciences.org/collections/plain language summaries. Or you can listen to the most recent episode, so episode 37 of the eLife podcast, because we talk about it in there. So that's me talking about it again, and with my colleague Sarah. That podcast more commonly features interviews with scientists. So again, that's another way that scientists can communicate their research via interviews and podcasts and talking about their research in their own words. So hopefully those quick things that we do can give you a flavour of the different types of science communication that are available. I'm sure more are going to come up when we talk to the panelists. So I'd like to get started by moving on to our first panelist. So that's Anne Osterrider, who's a lecturer a lecturer in biology and science communication at Oxford Brookes University, and is also the editor-in-chief of the AOB blog, the Plant Science blog. When she's not teaching and researching plant cell biology and biotechnology, she's coordinating science communication projects and providing training for researchers and students in science communication. So I'm really looking forward to what Anne's got to say. So first of all, I'd like to start off, Anne. Perhaps you could start off by telling us why you think it's important that scientists communicate their research to wider audiences.
Hi everyone. Hi Stuart. Thanks for introducing me. There are quite a lot of reasons, and they range from being motivated to help society, talk about our work, funding bodies, and I'm sure the other two panelists will touch on that as well. So my own personal reasons when I thought about this was, I'm a plant cell biologist, so I studied the Golgi apparatus and protein trafficking in cells. And to me, that's hugely fascinating. And of course, plants are really important to human health, for food, for health, for building materials, and so on. Now, most people, and especially students, think plants are really boring. Most people don't know that the Golgi apparatus exists. And so my personal motto became talk about anyone and anywhere what the Golgi apparatus is. So changing, I guess, changing how a certain research area is being discussed and taught in other, like with other audiences. So when I was a PhD student, I started doing cell biology music videos because I thought, well, one way to make organelles more engaging is to show current modern microscopy underlaid with really catchy, cheesy songs and cartoons, and that really worked. So that was picked up by teachers and students across the world, and that in a way made my topic more engaging without any direct contact necessarily. And I thought that's one way of using social media, and I guess snapshots like you write or podcasts, so you provide your science in a more accessible and engaging way. Now, since then, I've worked with lots of people. I've done science festivals, I've done talks, I've been on the stage to do stand-up comedy. Some of my favorite projects were working with students that were secondary school over 14. For example, a girl science club. I talked to A-level students. On Twitter, a teacher started a campaign where students had to run presidential elections for their organelle to run for president, and that's the hashtag organelle wars. And from that, we tweeted with students. I had a Skype chat with one class in Ohio. So these were more direct interactions. I directly talked to students about my research, and we brought it to life. So a kind of one-dimensional topic being taught in textbooks as quite simplified. We showed them that there's more that we don't know than we know, and in turn, they realized how much wasn't known, and that made them ask their own questions. So I think that's a really important principle, that you don't just present all the facts, but you highlight that we do research because there's so many things we don't know. And there's a bit of a common misconception that you need to dumb down your research and you have to simplify it very much. And I don't think that's true, because as long as you do it stepwise and you start by explaining the jargon and maybe leave out all the technical details like the protein acronyms that you studied, because they don't really matter. What matters are the concepts and the big ideas. And all of the students managed within a really like half an hour to ask questions that we asked in our grant applications, that scientists asked at conferences. So they were extremely intelligent. They really grasped the topic, and they also asked questions I hadn't thought of. And I think that's the other important reason why scientists should engage, because other people offer other perspectives on the topic, and you're forced to look at the bigger picture. Why does your research matter? Why should they care about it? And yeah, there's a bit of this image the wider public doesn't know about your topic, but actually they are probably experts in other areas. So there might be other science disciplines, they might be from the humanities, artists, social sciences, and also professions. So when I was at the science festival, I talked to one visitor, and he was a tree surgeon, and I'm sure that he knows a lot more about plants than I do, because I just look at cells. And so kind of by colliding these different areas of expertise, I think you can come up with really new and innovative ideas to take your research into new directions. And so if you engage with a wider audience, it should benefit your listener, your audience, because you hopefully manage to bring a subject near to them that they hadn't thought of in a way like this. But it should also benefit yourself and take your research and the way you look at your topic to a new level. So I think these are, so yeah, and so you can use social media, you can lots of other methods that you panelists are going to talk about, but that's kind of my main message. It makes you a better scientist as much as it brings your topic out into the public.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of those points, and I can relate to the questions about why study plants. So my background's plant biology too, and I experienced very similar questions. Why are you working on plants, not people, and things like that. So that all sounds very familiar, and I wonder if any audience have had similar experiences they want to share. One thing that I wondered if you could talk about a little bit more is you offer a training in science communication as well. Is that right?
Yes.
How does that work? Can you just quickly give us a little idea about that, please?
So I've done different training sessions for different audiences, and I guess like in science communication, you have to first look at your audience and you have to think, what do they want to get out? And sometimes it's quite specific technical skills. For example, how do you turn your research into a blog post, or how do you tweet your key points in 140 characters? Often it's now more about general public engagement, and especially what the different methods are that you can use. And so I like to think of it as a portfolio of different tools in a way. So I think traditionally outreach has been focused on working with schools and then maybe giving radio interviews or TV interviews. But I think there is a huge range of things in between these two that you can do, and that you can do quite easily. So if you tweet or if you do a Skype chat with a school, you can do that in your lunch break or in your tea break if you manage to make the context. So for some methods might be more time intense, like running a stall at the festival. Some methods could be done quite quickly. And choosing the right method also depends a bit on what you're good in. So if you really hate video, you shouldn't become a YouTube blogger. So if you like writing, then maybe blogging is better for you than talking on the radio. So kind of knowing yourself and knowing your strengths is as important in choosing your tool to communicate your science.
Those are really great points, I think, there. I asked about training because it's something that I'd come across speaking to people in preparation for the webinar, is that I think not every early career researcher or every PhD student has the opportunity to get training in how to communicate their research, either communicating to their peers or let alone to a wider audience. So I think it's one of those things that people assume they have to just pick up as they go along. So I was just intrigued by the fact that you do offer training in this. And to build on that, I wonder if we could ask the audience what their experience of training is. So we've organised some poll questions. Hopefully they'll appear on your screen and be able to answer them. So yeah, for this first one, I just want to know how many of you have had any training in science communication. So the first option is if you've had training and it included communications for general audiences, so public engagement and things like that. That's the option for you. The second one is if you've had communication that aims specifically at a scientific audience, so maybe a presentation, workshop, or a technical writing type course. That's the second option. If you haven't had any training, but you'd definitely be interested in it, there's the third option. And if you haven't had any and you're not sure whether or not you want any, maybe you think you can pick it up from experience instead, that's the fourth option. So hopefully we've got the answers coming in now, and the results should appear on your screen. Ooh. Yes, there they are. So majority of people haven't, but they would be interested, and then there's a sort of fairly equal mix of communication for general audience and communication for scientific audiences. I think that's probably what I expected, mixed, but maybe slightly more people who haven't had this training. That was definitely my experience during my PhD as well. So sticking to the topic of scientific communication training, our second speaker, John Shell from the University of Utah, who's a MD PhD candidate there. He was one of the winners of iBiology's Young Scientist seminars in 2015, and part of that winning was to attend a communication workshop at the Alan Alda Center for Science Communication. So, John, I wonder if you could start off by telling us your views on why you think science communication is important, and then maybe tell us a bit more about your training and what you've done with that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think everyone really, understands that communication is important. We all have different reasons for it. But we kind of understand why we need to communicate things. We need to write papers, we need to talk to other scientists, but we also need to engage the public. And it's something that I hadn't really appreciated before until I got the opportunity to work with iBiology and the ALDA Institute, is just how much we need to do this, but how little training there is, kind of like the poll alluded to, that everyone understands it's important. We give practice talks, we kind of go through all the steps that we need to, but we never really get formal training in it, we never get feedback in it. People show up to presentations and you might get you did a good job, you should explain this better, but there's never really a course that's taught in graduate school, at least in the US, and I'm sure many other countries, in terms of how to go about this. I come from a lab that really emphasizes very simple, clear stories. We work with yeast as a model organism, so again, we have to kind of make it interesting and keep it very simple. We don't want to go too complex. And especially in biochemistry, the same thing. We don't want to get too complex with chemical reactions because that's when people get bored. So we try to keep it simple, we try to keep it interesting. And I really thought that I kind of understood how to be a good communicator. And then I got the chance to work with Val and Louisa, two of the people at the ALDA Institute, or the ALDA Center, and realized how little I actually knew and how complex all of my very simple slides were. I gave a practice talk, and I think iBiology put it up as part of their kind of introduction to this. My first talk that I gave over Skype, horribly complex, even though I thought it was simple. And then one day of working at the ALDA Center, redesigned all of my slides, made them much simpler, much easier to understand. And really what they emphasized, we're talking about a wider audience, but just how much other scientists, even in our same field, don't get from our presentations. Like just how complex, 75% is the number they throw out, other scientists don't understand from your presentation. So there's a lot of time that's being wasted and a lot of opportunities to communicate really interesting ideas that we're not taking advantage of by being too complex, using too much jargon, and just speaking over each other's heads. Whereas if we simplify, not dumbing down, just kind of keeping things at a very basic level, keeping everyone on the same page, we can get people more excited about it, more interested. They can see how it can apply to their research and how their research can help you, and everyone can kind of benefit from this. I also just generally think that the wider public, the general audience, science is kind of our lifeboat for humanity. Like when anything goes wrong, we really need science to fix these problems. And with the March for Science and all of these things coming up, and kind of how we value science, how we communicate science, and how people appreciate it, it's getting that message out there that science is here to help. It's not here to, fight against. It's not here to serve its own purposes. We're all here because we're excited about it, and that communication of our excitement, communication of science, is what the most important aspect is to me.
I think that's a really strong message here. I like the analogy of science as a lifeboat, John. I think that's brilliant.
Again, be all the center, use analogy, use kind of story. Yeah,
yeah, that's good. So, yeah, I mean, I'm blown away by that one, John. Is there any other advice? So, mention using analogy, using stories. Is there any other a quick piece of advice that you've taken from that course?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, this course is probably the two people that work there. Val and Louisa are both in theater. They do more Shakespearean stuff, which wouldn't really seem as natural of a fit for teaching scientists how to communicate. But in 2 short days there, kind of the lessons that they taught and the things that they imparted change how I give talks, how I communicate with other people, and really change kind of the future of my scientific career. It's really just like improv, paying attention to your audience, which is hard here because we're kind of, you know, on a computer.
Yeah.
But it's about empathy, kind of, you know, paying attention to your audience, being more focused on the people you're talking to rather than yourself. And I think for me, one of the big stresses was I get really nervous giving talks. But when I reoriented and kind of worried more about, does the audience understand me? I'm less worried about, you know, am I anxious? Am I kind of explaining this correctly? It's like, do they understand? Are they paying attention? Are they excited? And I've started throwing in, you know, memes or cat videos or something that I can kind of get people interested again if they lose. If I talk about something more complex, use analogies and kind of tell stories about it. And one of the most poignant things that I learned was we wrote papers, we kind of delved into the nitty-gritty biochemistry. And it was really hard to come out of that and really hard to get perspective on it. But working with Val especially made me realize that I basically ignored one of the most poignant things that kind of happened throughout my scientific career. And as an MD, PhD who wants to practice medicine, this discovery of a patient mutation that actually led to a little girl dying and kind of changing her entire family's life. I didn't focus on that at all. I didn't really talk about it. I minimized it. I only talked about the yeast because I was afraid to use emotion and insert myself and my training into the story. But by doing that and by talking to her, she also had a brother who basically died of a pretty unexplained cancer and, you know, would have loved to have doctors understand what happened. I kind of realized how I wasn't communicating, and I missed a major opportunity to really connect with other people, which is a lesson that I'll never forget.
I can understand that, John. That's really impressive. I think, yeah, the points there about focusing on the audience as a way to relieve nerves. I wonder if that's something that people can take from this, because I would agree, and I can definitely relate to that feeling of feeling nervous before giving a talk, and yeah, maybe focusing on the audience rather than yourself will actually help with that. So yeah, thanks, John, for that. We're going to move on to our final panelist. So Fionnuala Ratcliffe from Cancer Research UK. So Fionnuala, like myself, isn't a scientist. Well, I used to be a scientist, but I'm not anymore. So she's going to provide us with more of an outsider's perspective, I guess. So Fionnuala works is a research engagement manager at Cancer Research UK, which is one of the world's leading cancer charities dedicated to saving lives through research. And in that role, she organises public engagement events with matching researchers to members of the public to organise engaging events and communication activities. So Fionnuala, same question for you that I've asked the other panelists. Why do you think it's important that scientists take the time to engage with wider audiences?
Thanks, Stuart. Hi, everyone. It was really good to hear from John and Anne. Their input as well can really support the things that they were saying. So from my point of view, yeah, as a person who's kind of trying to facilitate these engagement activities, I have to say that my expertise is mainly in face-to-face engagement, kind of lab tours, festivals, talks, that kind of thing, and less on the writing side. But in terms of why I think scientists should engage, I guess I'm going to kind of soften things up even more and kind of bring it back to basics and just say I've always kind of been interested in dialogue in my background, and I think that anything that brings people together from completely different backgrounds that might not otherwise interact, I think that's wonderful, and we should do more of it, because particularly nowadays, even though things can feel kind of so much more connected with social media and all these ways to connect, actually things like Facebook algorithms and whatever else, we're actually becoming a bit more siloed into our very different tribes, hearing from people with similar viewpoints to us and not from the others, and that can be quite isolating and it can be quite divisive, and there aren't loads of opportunities actually to break out of that. And I think kind of public engagement is a really good way for scientists to do that. So we're lucky at Cancer Research UK. We have so many supporters. All our funding comes from individuals, and so we have people from supporters who kind of donate thousands of pounds to us, to those who volunteer their times in shops or run a marathon. So it's a big family, but it's a family full of lots of different people with very different profiles and experiences and political preferences and everything. And so they might disagree on many things, but they're kind of, what I feel is that they're really connected by this one thing, which is supporting cancer research. And many of them have been kind of affected by cancer. So that's a really amazing opportunity for us to bring together those different people, to connect them. And we really want kind of scientists to be part of that, to come in, speak to those supporters about their work, kind of connect them to the wider world, because then you feel part of that community. You kind of place yourself in a kind of wider society, and you can see how what you're doing is worthwhile, how it's part of something bigger. And this kind of public engagement is a really valuable way to do that. Now, I know that not everyone, I mean, almost everyone or pretty much everyone knows someone or has been affected by cancer in some way. So I know that not all science fields have that kind of very kind of intimate connection, but there are lots of other ways to connect, even if your area of research isn't so applicable to kind of a person's lived experience. So even if, say, you're all based in research institutes or something similar, and that's in a city or a town or a village or whatever, and so that kind of building itself even as a presence in that place, it's not there in isolation. So that's a kind of starting point for connection, even if you're working on the kind of most esoteric area of science. The fact that you're there in that location is a way to connect you, and people will be interested in knowing what's going on in that building, which they've seen but might not know anything about. So there are kind of ways to connect. I mean, so for example, yesterday we often bring our supporters in for tours of the Cancer Institute, and we brought some staff who work for a recruitment agency who have been fundraising for us for the past year. And so they came in and they had a look around the tissue bank, with our tissue bank manager was showing them where he keeps the freezer room where he keeps the tissue samples which are used for research. And they kind of connected really well about this issue of how you store things and keep a really tight database where you make sure all your records are up to date. So even though it's completely different areas, the recruitment agency could really understand why that is a tricky issue and could kind of share this experience of how to go about doing that best. So even if you think there's not a way to connect, often there's something there which you can kind of share in common. And I guess in terms of kind of ways to go about doing engagement, I mean, I'm a big fan of face-to-face engagement. That's kind of what I deal with most of the time, mainly because it really personalizes you and makes you as a scientist human. Not only does that kind of strengthen people's trust in you and what you're saying and doing, it is true that people are more skeptical of experts and authority now, and being that person on the street talking to them is a way to get around that, I suppose. But it also leads to this conversation and allows you to better understand each other's point of view, which I think is really valuable. And I guess, yeah, I mean, the other main thing I was going to say was, and John was talking about it as well, kind of really eloquently, was that you should use this infrastructure that's available to you. Universities and research institutes have engagement and comms team in there, and funders and charities like Cancer Research UK love to and are like desperate for researchers who are interested in doing engagement and comms to go in and talk to their supporters. So it's probably there. If you don't know about it, ask around and get in touch and let them know, because that's a kind of really good starting point for things like training or trying out a small bit of engagement. They should be able to help you with that.
Great. I think that last point there, Fionnuala, is a really good one, a practical one that hopefully people can make use of. I definitely agree that so many different facets to being a scientist, and there's so many different areas that you need to be good at. That sometimes if you can get help in those areas where you know you're less comfortable, you're less familiar with. If there are people out there who do it as a profession or who are more experienced, tap into those resources and definitely ask around people at your institute, contact the funders and things like that. Tap into those networks is definitely a great point. So yeah, I'd just like to thank all the panelists for their excellent insights there. I think we've moved on to we're on schedule. Move on to the next part where we're going to move on to the Q&A. But before we do that, so we've all spoken about why we think it's important that scientists engage with their audience, with wider audiences. So we want to hear sort of from you, the audience. What do you feel? Why this is important? So we've got the second poll question. So we're trying to make you choose one option here. So we want you to pick the option that you think is most likely to convince you to communicate your research more widely. So we've kind of come up with 4 themes here. Is it so that you can make sure that your research has an impact in the real world? So beyond the lab and change the lives of people? Is it these points that Fionnuala was bringing in there, and John as well, about increasing support for science and making the public more aware of science, what's happening, and maybe that supports even in terms of donations, like from Cancer Research UK. Alternatively, is the main benefit you could see with something for yourself. So your communication skills are an important part of your career, and any practice you get at that is broadly applicable. So communicating to the general public, you're using very similar skills to delivering a good presentation. I think John touched on some of those skills, some of those points. Or is it this last one? Is it about motivation? Is it really what makes your work have meaning to you, and you just enjoy it? So if you can select one of those, if you feel like you actually want to select more than one or tell us something else, please let us know via the questions and we will try and share some of those. I think the answers are in now, so we can share those on the screen. Oh, yes. So the top 2. So definitely these wider benefits, having this impact in the real world and increasing support for science are the most motivating. I think that's really interesting, but it's not the selfish benefits that are the ones that motivate people. Potentially selfish. But I think I'd be interested to see what people say in the comments. Okay. So if we now move on to the Q&A part, I can see some questions coming in. So just to explain how you can send in the questions, the details are now on the screen, so you can obviously send them in via the question box, or you can tweet them to us at eLife Careers using the hashtag ECR Wednesday. So we've had some questions. One of them here is perhaps John, maybe you'd like to talk about this one. So do you have any sort of tips for how you translate like a scientific presentation into a presentation that's more aimed at a general audience? You mentioned that was something that you did after your training course. How would you go about doing that?
And I think Anne touched on it a little bit too. Basically stripping it down to the bare essentials. If you don't need details like different protein names, if you can get away with one general schematic and one general picture, for a presentation to other scientists, that's more than enough. But really it's, what Fionnuala talked about is finding some commonality. It really doesn't matter in terms of what you're talking about, as long as you can find something in common with them to get them engaged and get them interested in what you're doing. Once you have that kind of basic, where you're kind of both on the same page, they're interested, you're excited, you're both talking in that way, then you can start adding on details and kind of gauge their response to it. It's just gauging the temperature of the room, basically. When someone gets bored and they don't want to listen to you anymore, you can usually tell. And you start to get back to, more basics, more of what you're excited about. It's like the cocktail party analogy of, you start boring someone with all the details about your work. No one wants to listen to how you ran 600 PCRs that day. They want to listen to, what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it, why you're frustrated about it. I think that's really just finding that common ground is the most important part.
Yeah, that's a great point. Anne, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that as well?
Sorry, could you please repeat the initial question?
So the initial question was, you can give examples of ways to maybe take something that's like a scientific presentation and make it more accessible for a general audience, for a common audience.
Yes, okay, so I thought when I gave the talk to the A-level students, I actually did show my data like real proper data that I got from the microscope. But what I did in between was I thought of an interactive game, no, not game, analogy, where I asked students to come on stage, and one group had a stack of pita bread in a packaging and the other one had it without, and then I asked them to be the act inside the skeleton and pass them both along, and obviously the one without the packaging struggled, and so I said, so I researched the packaging. So coming up with an analogy maybe that's interactive, hands-on, and that really re-energized the whole room, because the colleagues of the students, they were on the floor laughing, the teachers were laughing, and that broke up. So after about, I think after about 10 minutes, if you build in breaks, maybe have some interactive polls like we have here, or if you ask the audience questions back, I think that really helps as well. And really scientific conferences are quite ineffective, because we sit there for 7 hours in a whole day just listening to people, and that really goes against all basic pedagogic principles, where you should have interactive sessions and breaks and group work and so on.
Brilliant, yeah. So actually the questions are coming in thick and fast, so we'll move on to the next one. So we've had a question, so how do you find opportunities to share science is one of the questions we've had. So I think we've touched on some of that. Has anyone got anything they'd wanted to add in this area about finding those opportunities? Fenella, do you want to go for that one?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I'd kind of reiterate what I said earlier about look to those people who kind of have it as their professional role to facilitate these kind of engagement and communication opportunities. So to me, because I'm sort of the connection from the fundraising, all the various kind of fundraising teams at CR UK to the researchers, and so there's a real variety of opportunities that come in, things like going to speak at schools, going to speak at staff fundraising weeks to go and tell them about the science, being at science festival, being at the kind of a museum late event. So they're a really good conduit to those kind of opportunities, and we'll have a great oversight. So if there's a thing that you, a kind of area for engagement or communication you think you might be interested in, there'll be a really good route to that. Now, if such a kind of team doesn't exist in the institute where you are, even kind of looking in your local area, I'm really keen about kind of trying to engage locally around your research institute. So are there schools who would be interested in a researcher going and talking to them about their science? Are there local businesses who have lunchtime talks and might like a researcher to come in and talk to them? Probably yes, that is certainly the case around the institutes here, and it's probably the case around you as well. So they might not think to ask, but if you approach them, then that's a really good route to it.
I think definitely, yeah, the focus on local where that's an option is definitely great. I guess another way that you can do this, perhaps if you're in an area where there aren't many other people, I don't know, somewhere more remote, is obviously social media would be a way to canvass opinions. So I know that there are a number of Twitter accounts that focus on science communication. If you look at things like hashtag SciComm and SciComm chats, and there's an account I am SciComm. There are people sharing their experiences, and number of opportunities you'll see them come up, and different things that people have been involved in, and then find out about whether or not you can get involved in them as well. So I think there are a number of ways that you can research this, and I think Anne touched on it earlier, and play to things that you're interested in. So if you're looking for ways to write, blogging and things like that, so you don't have to set up your own blog. You can maybe find an existing blog and ask if you can write for them. Is that something that you'd recommend too, Anne, blogging?
I just wanted to say, yes, so if you look at learned societies, so your discipline-specific societies, at your journals, I think all of them now have some kind of outlets, which might be a blog, it might be a bulletin, a newsletter, or something like that, and they're desperately looking for people to contribute to that for content. So it's actually quite easy to find outlets to participate. I think the important thing is that you get proactive. So I've heard quite a few people say that they want to be a science writer one day, and then I ask them, so what writing do you do? And they say nothing, because I don't have time. But I don't think that's how it works. If you want to be a science writer or a science communicator, just start doing it. Don't wait until someone comes to you and tells you you can start doing it, because you have to build up your portfolio first, and then you kind of, I guess, carve your path as you go along. So be proactive and just come up with stuff, and don't be deterred if others kind of criticize you if you're being creative, because even though creativity is needed for science, it's still quite very much methods and protocols and repetitions. And sometimes something you do might be something that science or scientists haven't seen before, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means you might have to get some buy-in first before it really lifts off.
Good point. Yeah. So yeah, the question's still coming in. They're going to move on to the next one. So this question is, how willing are scientific publishers to have simplified YouTube blogs based on various scientific publications with due citation? So I can start some of that. So I know that we've had a number of papers that have had YouTube video abstracts put on YouTube, and we definitely would support that as another way to communicate your research, and we can definitely link to that via the comments on the articles that we allow. I know some other publishers have allowed links directly to them within the articles. And you have you've an editor for a blog. Do you have any experience of like the use of YouTube-based sort of videos, things like that?
So as blog editor, we really like any videos or animated GIFs or media that moves, because there have been quite a few studies, both academic studies and also from professional software providers, saying that content with videos and animated GIFs is shared much more widely than just text. So any way you can come up and put your paper into video or GIF, preferably maybe 30 seconds, 1 minute, not more, then I think your content has really potential to reach a wider audience, because it's going to be shared widely on Facebook, Twitter, and so on. Do you have that experience, Stuart?
Yeah, I would definitely say that those papers that provide us with videos, even if they are videos that are their actual data, they get a lot of traction on definitely on platforms like social media. So I guess whilst we're talking about videos, so John, your iBiology seminar is recorded and anyone can go watch it. So how's your experience of communicating via the medium of videos?
Yeah, and I wanted to say it was something I was very unfamiliar with and kind of intimidated by, and I still avoid looking at my video because it's still kind of a traumatic experience. Seeing yourself recorded is always a much different, it's a different experience. But iBiology and the Alda Center do it so well in terms of, getting you to actually communicate with a video camera a way that you would have a conversation with a person. And I think that's the main thing. You don't want to just lecture to a video camera. You want to have a conversation and kind of communicate out there. So it's a performance. I mean, it's kind of, you're putting a video out there to the world. But iBiology has a great collection of these, and I've started going through, and if I don't understand a seminar, or like I'm interested in a subject after someone gives a talk, I want to explore a little bit more. There are so many on iBiology, from Nobel laureates, National Academy members, tons of people from around the world. You can get a really good perspective in a really simple, quick 30-minute kind of presentation. And the other thing, in terms of recorded media, I think it would be interesting to see it kind of added to journals. But I've also just loved, so the Lindau Nobel laureate meetings record a lot of presentations by Nobel laureates, kind of their life stories, how they came up with their discoveries, kind of some challenges that they had. So between iBiology and the Lindau Nobel laureate site, there are a lot of really good videos out there. And then of course TEDmed, other kind of talks that are just really exciting to watch. You can kind of, rather than watching a sitcom, I'll throw on a TED talk and kind of just get excited about something I knew nothing about.
And do you find by watching those videos, you're picking up different ways that you could use the similar sort of skills to talk about things, or is it purely enjoyment when you're watching those videos?
I mean, it's a little bit of both. It's the subliminal kind of how people present things, and the clarity that comes across. You kind of think about, oh, maybe this slide I could change and talk about it a little bit differently, or when I talk at Thanksgiving with my family about my science, I could kind of explain it in this way. It's kind of using those opportunities where you can find them.
So I think that's something that other people relate to, definitely remember talking to my family about my PhD and trying different ways of phrasing things. So I'm trying to see, we've got some other questions here. Maybe a question for, probably again for Anne and John. Any tips on how to deal with supervisors who aren't used to or not interested about writing, speaking to wide audiences? So I'm guessing that's coming from an early career researcher who doesn't feel that they've got the go-ahead to do this kind of thing. So are there ways that they can do this, convince their supervisor? Any tips for them? John, do you want to go first? Oh, yeah. Anne, sorry, go first.
Go ahead.
So it depends. So some universities actually have an official PhD training program. For example, our university requires every PhD student to do 70 hours of training, and that includes things like science communication. So that's a really good argument at first. Second, there's a really good argument in that it's skills that will help you to write better and give better presentations, so it should benefit your supervisor. They can use it to go back to funding bodies. Your university or department might be very interested in your work, so maybe you could approach your professional support staff and tell them what you do, and then senior members of your department might look very favorable on that. And lastly, if all of that fails, maybe you just have to ignore it. That sounds a bit bad, but in the end, it is your career and it's your skills. And looking at the statistics, how few people, for example, end up staying in academia, it's crucial that you do build up your portfolio of career skills just to give you more opportunities to move into different jobs afterwards, kind of for your own sanity and avoiding panic attacks, what to do. If you don't have time to do it during the day, maybe you can do something on the weekend, help at the science festival. I do most of my tweeting on my smartphone while waiting for the bus, or if you do wait for your PCR or centrifuge, for example. So I think there are opportunities to do bits of SciComm that don't take away a huge amount of time and that you maybe can even do sneakily. Yeah, so that's what I would say.
John, would you add to that?
Yeah, I think, you had the poll on kind of why people want to communicate, and there were a lot of very selfless people out there that it's for the good of society and it's, to further science. I also think of it in terms of a somewhat selfish aspect, that it's just exciting to be able to talk to other people about what you do and have them get excited about it. So I would hope that if you go to your mentor and say that, having these conversations and doing this gets you more excited about your own work and makes you want to work harder on your project and explore new areas, that would be enough to kind of get them to let you do some of this stuff. Because it just, I love science because I get to talk to other people and I get to meet really interesting, excited people. So I kind of stay in it so I can keep hanging out with really interesting people doing really interesting things. And that's the communication aspect. You kind of need that in order to stay excited about it. We get too, if you're only doing your experiment, it just gets very jading and it's very hard to step out of it. But if you kind of look around, kind of get excited again, you work harder, you come in on weekends, you stay late. It helps everyone.
I think, yeah, I definitely remember the excitement of talking about what you're doing and remembering why you're doing it as a way to get through doing a time course that required you coming in at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the evening and first thing the next morning. And yeah, I can definitely relate to that, and I hope people in the audience can too. Let's move on to the next question. So we've been asked whether, in our view, is there a role for journals, scientific societies, and I'd add to that sort of funders and charities in enabling this engagement in diverse audiences. So I've mentioned some of the ways that eLife tries to do this is via the helping authors to provide the plain language summaries, the digest. Fionnuala, do you want to talk about how you see CR UK's role in enabling engagement? I think that's quite close to what your area is.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, I definitely think there's a role for this kind of facilitation of engagement. And certainly CR UK, even from a completely selfish perspective, are really keen to kind of support researchers getting involved in various different public engagement and communications activities, because we have thousands and thousands of people who are interested in cancer research, and either we want to kind of show them how the money they've donated is spent, or we want to encourage them to continue to support us, or just give them some kind of inspiration that what they've done and the money or the time that they've given us is kind of being put to good use and help them to feel good about that. So certainly CR UK are kind of really keen from that point of view. And I also think funders in general, I think either if the money comes through from the taxpayers or if it comes from individual donations or another way, I think they're increasingly seeing that there's some responsibility associated with that to show people how that's spent. And I guess, I mean, the other thing is we want, CR UK want our researchers to have a good experience of being funded by us, and that doesn't just mean giving them the money to pay for the lab tools that they need. It means giving them the opportunities for training and development, and increasingly that means these other kind of softer skills like communication, because we'd like them to continue being cancer researchers and having an excellent time doing that. And I think the funders are realizing that part of that is providing these different opportunities and not just kind of saying that they need to be slaving away in the lab all the time.
I think that's a great point there, Fionnuala. So I think we're approaching the end. We might have time for one more question. This is a question that I might have expected. What if your topic is really obscure? Are there suggestions there? So is it perhaps better to talk about someone else's work or past project? John, would you like to go for that one? And then we'll hear from Anne maybe as well.
Yeah.
John.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, even if your topic is obscure, you're excited about it, you study it, hopefully. I mean, I hope that that's true, that even if you're working on something that no one could ever possibly see as being related to cancer or being related to their own lives, you're excited about that. And if you can communicate that excitement, why you study it, why you work long hours, we're all here because we enjoy it and we're excited about it. We're not here for money. We're not here for selfish reasons. So it's just getting that aspect across. And then just very generally, like, you never know what kind of obscure thing that they might be interested in. So again, it's kind of probing with questions, with dialogue, really trying to figure out what they're excited about and what they're interested in, and getting back to what motivates them, what excites them, and how you can kind of connect in that way.
I think that's a great point. Anne, do you have anything to add?
I think when you tell me that your project is really obscure, I immediately have got 1,000 questions. Why is it obscure? What are you studying? What makes it obscure? Why do you feel it's obscure compared to others? And maybe obscure projects offer even more engagement frame than kind of straightforward ones. So I would probably kind of start by posing questions to the audience of, have you heard of this before? What do you know about the topic? And as John said, what is it that makes you interested in it, and what is it that makes you passionate about it, and why should others care? So yeah, so use storytelling more than trying to explain all the technical details of your topic.
What about if they did think that maybe they actually do want to talk about someone else's projects? Maybe someone else's project is more exciting. Do you think there's scope for scientists talking about research outside of their field to the public?
There are quite a lot of bloggers who actually write journal club style blogs, and I think you have to be careful when you say about someone else's topic. I wouldn't talk about someone else's data or results, but I certainly would talk about project research that other people in my area do as examples of what is it that excites plant scientists to work on it. So I think that's a general advice when you do talk about your research. It's thinking what is your research, and you don't necessarily have to talk about lab meeting like data you just got, and you might not want to, or you're not allowed to because of intellectual property reasons. But that doesn't mean you can't talk about general things. For example, in my area, I might talk about fluorescent proteins and microscopy, and how 3 scientists got Nobel Prizes for that by doing this and this kind of research and squashing up jellyfish. And that's not my research project at all, but it still puts my work into a bigger context. So that's one way forward, I think.
I think that's some really practical advice there, and yeah, thank you for that, Anne. So, like I said, that was probably our last question. I just wanted to give each of you a chance to summarize anything up, or maybe hint at what we might want to talk about in the Twitter chat later on. So let's stick to the order. So, Anne, do you want to go first there as well, please? So, a leaving remark. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's about discovering why you're passionate about your research, and then discovering non-traditional methods to communicate why you're passionate about your research and what it is that you're researching. I think that's the most important part. So being able to step out of your comfort zone and taking risks is certainly involved in that, but it really helps your professional development to do that.
I think that's a great point. John, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I just think, we've touched on a lot of things, but really it's about connecting with your audience, connecting with whoever you're talking to, and keeping things simple so that they're excited about it. If you beat them over the head with too many details, that's going to be counterproductive. But if you really explain and really get people excited, that's the goal of science communication. And I think there are a lot of people out there doing really great work in this. iBiology, the Alda Center do great work. There are a lot of blog posts from a lot of people. And the tools are really getting better. So I'd say take advantage of them, see what works for other people, and kind of develop your own style, because there's not a one-size-fits-all type of science communication workbook. It's going to be very context dependent, very individual dependent, project dependent, and it takes practice. Like, I consider myself a novice, by no means an expert. But it's something that you keep working at throughout your entire life, and maybe in 30 years I'll actually be good at it, but right now it's just practice. So.
Practice. Okay. Again, some more great advice. Vanula, do you want to carry on, please?
Hi, sure. Yes. I really agree with what Anne and John have said, and that idea of doing it your way, I think, is really great. I mean, I think people and scientists can think that you need to be really extroverted or something to do public engagement, but I mean, I know I'm not particularly, in my kind of preferred way of engaging is kind of one-to-one, having a conversation with people, whereas I know other people, kind of throw themselves across the room in a presentation, acting out immunotherapy or something like that. So you don't have to be like that. You can be more on the kind of one-to-one conversation side, and that's just as valuable. And I guess the other thing, which is I was going to add to the talk about kind of how to present your work earlier, but it's just based on experience of working with researchers presenting their work, and what they like. The kind of big no-no for me is don't go from your academic slides. Start with a blank page and write out the story, kind of map out that story that you're telling in bullet points, and add some slides if you want, but mainly images and kind of prompts and linking to those analogies. Don't go from your academic slides, because it'll just confuse people. It's best to kind of keep it high level and stick with the story.
Okay. So yeah, so that's bringing back to the point about how do you translate a presentation. The answer is don't. Start again. Start from the audience from the very beginning. Is that your advice there?
It is sort of, yeah, because I know it's more time consuming, but I think if you try and kind of translate across, you get kind of bogged down, whereas really you need to be kind of taking a big step back and just pulling out the kind of main points about why you're doing it and what benefit it's going to be to people and what questions you're asking.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'd agree with that one, based on experience of helping people to write these late summaries. Sometimes if they're starting from their abstract, and their abstract, you need to go back several steps to get to where you should be starting. So I think it's been a great discussion. I think I've got a little bit of time, so I think the key take homes there is to make sure that we're focusing on the why questions, our motivations, why we're doing it. And to step back and take the big picture. If we can, as a scientist, you can work out how you can relate your work to your audience. That's a great way to think about it. Putting yourself outside your comfort zone, but at the same time also playing to your strengths, are different ways that you can make sure that you find what works for you. So I think that sets us into a great start to continue the discussion on Twitter. There are a number of questions we didn't get to, so we'll make sure we'll carry those across. And if anyone has a question that they didn't get a chance to ask or hasn't been answered, please make sure to share those on Twitter. I think that's everything. So thank you to all the panelists, so to Anne, John, and Fionnuala for joining me today. I really enjoyed it. And thank you everyone who's watching. Like I said, we're on Twitter any minute now, so we'll see you there. Okay, goodbye.